My wife held my insulin over the sink and said, "You won't need this anymore. But first, give me your digital wallet password." Water kept running. My glucose monitor chirped like a smoke alarm. I knew exactly how fast my body could fall apart. I'm 57 years old. I've lived with type 1 diabetes since Reagan was in office. I know what 400 feels like. I know the thirst that burns your throat raw, the way your thoughts turn thick and slippery, the way breathing starts to feel like work. I also know how little time you have when insulin is taken out of the picture. Carol stood between me and the kitchen doorway. Her arm extended a small glass vial pinched between her fingers. Morning light from our Plainfield, Illinois kitchen window caught the liquid inside clear and harmless looking, like it wasn't the only thing keeping me alive. The faucet was on full blast, the drain open, water roaring like it was in a hurry to erase something. "You're sweating already," she said, smiling. "What's that 400? How long until your organs start shutting down?" My continuous glucose monitor chirped again, a sharp, needy sound. I swallowed, my mouth dry as chalk. "Carol," I said, "please, just put it down." She laughed, not loud, almost bored. "You always say please when you're scared." We'd been married 23 years. I'd heard that laugh before when she caught a good deal at Target, when she told a story she thought made her sound clever. I had never heard it aimed at my survival. The smell of stale coffee hung in the air. The fridge hummed behind her. Everything else in the house felt normal. That made it worse. "Give me the password," she said, "the one for the money you hid." "I didn't hide it," I said. "It's for retirement, for emergencies, like this." She tilted the vial a little closer to the drain. My stomach clenched. "You don't get to decide what emergencies are," she said. "I do." My hands were shaking. Not from low blood sugar, this was the other kind. The kind that comes when your body's full of sugar it can't use, and your heart starts pounding like it's trying to escape. I could feel the heat in my face, the sweat on my back. I needed water. I needed insulin. I needed her to stop. "I'll get you money," I said. "We can talk to the bank. We can..." She shook her head and let the vial tip just enough for a splash of insulin to spill into the sink. Clear drops vanished down the drain. "That's a sample," she said, "to show I'm serious." Something broke loose inside my chest. I lurched forward, but she stepped back and raised her voice sharp now. "Don't." The room tilted. My vision blurred around the edges like a bad TV signal. I backed off, gripping the counter. The laminate felt slick under my palms. I thought about the garage. I thought about my car. I thought about how long I could stand without collapsing. "Password," she said. I didn't answer. Her face changed then, tightened. She tipped the vial again. "Carol," I said, "you're going to kill me." She paused, just long enough to look at me, really look like she was measuring something. "You're being dramatic," she said. "You'll be fine, as soon as you cooperate." She dumped the rest of the vial into the sink. The sound it made, thin glass tapping porcelain, will stay with me forever. I staggered backward, my heel catching on the edge of the rug. My CGM chirped again, louder this time, urgent. My breathing turned shallow. I tasted metal at the back of my tongue. "I'm calling for help," I said, though my phone was on the counter behind her. She glanced at it, then at me. "You won't make it in time." I don't remember deciding to move. I just did. I bolted for the garage, my shoulder clipping the doorframe. She yelled something behind me, but I was already through, fumbling with the light switch, stumbling past the lawnmower. The world narrowed. Every step felt like wading through syrup. I got my keys. I got to the car. I sat down. Then the nausea hit. Hard. I leaned forward, retching dryly, my chest burning. I knew I couldn't drive like this. I knew I might not make it back inside. That's when I heard Frank's voice. "Tom, Sorna one." Frank Lasky lived 2 houses down. 63, retired pharmacist, the kind of neighbor who still waved when he got the mail. He was standing in the driveway, concern written all over his face. "You okay?" he asked. I tried to answer. Nothing came out but a croak. He was at my side in seconds. He smelled like aftershave and cold air. He saw my face, the sweat, the shaking. "Diabetic?" he asked. I nodded. "Insulin is just my current." I shook my head. He didn't ask why. He ran to his car and came back with a small insulated pouch. "Emergency pen," he said. "Get it in you." I fumbled, missed the first time. He steadied my hand. The relief didn't come right away. It never does. But I could breathe again. Sirens came later. The EMTs asked questions. Frank answered most of them. I lay on the stretcher staring up at the pale winter sky, my heart still racing. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I saw Carol at the end of the driveway, arms crossed, face unreadable. That was 11 days ago. This morning she was sobbing in a courtroom while they read the charges out loud. But back then, as the ambulance doors closed, I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was this: what happened in that kitchen wasn't a fight between spouses. It was leverage. And once you see that clearly, you don't forget it. People always ask how a marriage ends up like that. Like there must have been shouting for years, broken plates, neighbors calling the police. The truth is quieter. That's what makes it dangerous. Carol and I met in 2001 at a church potluck in Joliet. I was 35 working logistics for a regional freight company. She was 30, sharp as a tack hair, pulled back, laughing too loud at my dumb joke about mystery casseroles. She liked that I was steady. I liked that she was decisive. At least that's what I called it back then. When I told her I had type 1 diabetes on our third date, she didn't flinch. She asked smart questions. She reminded me to eat. When my sugar dropped once during a movie, she drove me to a Walgreens at 10 at night and bought half the glucose aisle like she was stocking a bunker. I married that woman. For a long time we were ordinary. Sunday dinners, meatloaf on Mondays, Hy-Vee runs on Fridays. I counted carbs. She balanced the checkbook. We moved to Plainfield when the schools were better and the taxes made sense. We talked about retirement the way everyone our age does, vaguely, like it was a weather forecast far out on the horizon. The shift didn't happen all at once, it crept. After 2020, everything got tighter. My company downsized. I took an early retirement package that looked good on paper, but shaved years off what we'd planned. Carol started watching the accounts closer. Too close. She'd question every line item. Why is there another pharmacy charge, she'd ask, like insulin was a hobby. I tried to keep things calm. That's my flaw. I smooth edges. I avoid fights. When she started snapping, I told myself she was scared. We were getting older. Health wasn't theoretical anymore. Money felt louder. I opened a separate digital account without telling her. Not to hide money from my wife, I told myself. To protect it. Retirement money, emergency money, dignity money. I didn't use fancy terms. It was just something she couldn't empty in a moment of panic. That secrecy poisoned things faster than I expected. She started asking questions that weren't really questions. You still have access to everything, right? You're not keeping anything from me? I said no because explaining felt harder than lying. I regret that now. Her jokes got sharper. Must be nice, she'd say, when I took time to manage my sugars. You get special rules. Once she laughed and said if I ever wanted control over you, I'd just hide your insulin. I laughed too. I shouldn't have. The first time she went through my phone, she said it was an accident. The second time, she said a spouse shouldn't have secrets. The third time, she didn't bother explaining. I tried to talk to her. I really did. One night after dinner, I said, "You scare me sometimes." She rolled her eyes and said, "You scare yourself. I'm just reacting." That's when I started keeping notes. Not because I planned revenge, because my memory felt slippery around her. I'd write down dates, what was said, how it made me feel. Old habit from work. Documentation calmed me. The morning in the kitchen didn't come out of nowhere. It came from months of her feeling entitled to decide what mattered more, my health or her fear of losing control. When I was discharged from the ER that day, the nurse looked me in the eye and said, "Sir, withholding insulin can kill you." She said it gently, like she was explaining gravity. That sentence stuck. At home, Carol acted normal. Made soup. Asked if I needed anything. The performance was almost impressive. If I hadn't felt the fear still buzzing in my bones, I might have believed it. That night, while she slept, I checked my digital account. There it was. A transfer. $500. Then another. Small enough to miss if you weren't looking. Big enough to say something had changed. I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart thudding, and realized something colder than anger. She wasn't improvising. She was testing limits. The next day I talked to Frank. Just coffee casual. He didn't tell me what to do. He told me what he'd seen in his career. People who mess with meds, he said, don't stop when you ask nicely. I didn't want to believe that about my wife. But belief isn't required for truth to exist. 3 days later, I found a folded piece of paper in the junk drawer while looking for batteries. A business card clipped to a form. Power of attorney consultation. Tuesday at 10. My hands went cold. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where insulin had drained away, and understood the shape of the problem for the first time. This wasn't about money or anger, or even marriage. It was about control. And if I didn't act carefully, legally, and quietly, the next countdown wouldn't stop at the ambulance. The thing about crossing a line is you don't always feel it under your feet. Sometimes you notice it only after you've stepped back and realize the ground behind you isn't the same anymore. After the ER visit, I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. Not paranoid, focused. There's a difference. When you've lived with diabetes as long as I have, you learn to notice patterns, how your body feels before the numbers spike, how stress sneaks into your bloodstream before you can talk yourself out of it. Carol noticed too. She watched me watch her. The kitchen went quiet in the days after. No jokes, no snide comments, just a careful politeness that felt rehearsed. She asked how my sugars were, but not the way she used to. This was data gathering, not concern. I moved my insulin. I didn't tell her where. I kept a pen in my work bag, one in the trunk of the car, one at Frank's place. I hated living like that, but I hated the alternative more. Every time I did it, a part of me whispered, "This is your wife. You shouldn't have to do this." Another part answered back, "You shouldn't have to survive your own house either." The physical effects lingered. Stress pushed my numbers up even when I ate right. My mouth stayed dry. Sleep came in thin slices. At night, I'd wake up listening for the sound of the faucet, like my brain had decided that noise meant danger now. 3 days after the sink incident, Carol asked for my phone. "Mine's acting up," she said. "I just want to check something." I handed it over because saying no would have escalated things. She scrolled too long. Her thumb moved with familiarity. When she handed it back, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You really should be more careful with passwords," she said. That night after she went to bed, I checked my digital wallet again. Another transfer. 900 this time. Same destination, same device ID, same timestamp pattern, late evening when she knew I'd be tired. I sat there heart pounding and felt something solid click into place. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't acting on impulse. She had a system. The next morning, I made an appointment with my endocrinologist. I told him everything, not dramatically, just facts. He leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and said something that stripped the emotion out of it in the worst possible way. If someone deliberately withholds insulin, he said, that's not marital conflict. That's medical endangerment. He printed a letter for me, plain language, clinical, time to DKA estimates, risks. I folded it carefully and put it in my jacket pocket like it was armor. On the way home, I pulled over at a rest stop on I-55. My hands were shaking. My glucose had climbed past 300, not from food, but from adrenaline. I sat on a cold plastic bench and breathed through it, watching semis roar past. Men my age hauling freight, just trying to get home in one piece. I wondered how many of them knew how fragile things really were. That night, Carol pushed harder. She brought up power of attorney at dinner like it was an article she'd read. "You know," she said casually, "it's something couples our age should think about, in case something happens." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "What kind of something?" I asked. She shrugged. "Health stuff. You know, if you couldn't make decisions." The room felt smaller. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. "I'm not incapacitated," I said. "Not yet," she replied too quickly. I excused myself and went to the bathroom. I locked the door. I checked my sugar. 348. My breathing felt thick like the air had weight. I splashed water on my face and stared at my reflection. 57. Gray at the temples. Eyes tired but still clear. This is the line, I thought. This is where it stops. The next day I met an old friend from my logistics days. We didn't talk about Carol directly. We talked about processes, documentation, chains of custody, digital footprints. He didn't tell me to destroy her. He told me how people destroy themselves when you give them enough rope and a calendar. I started backing up everything. Screenshots, bank logs, texts. My CGM alerts synced to timestamps. I didn't alter anything. I didn't bait her into crimes. I just let her keep being who she was becoming. There was a moment late one evening when she almost caught me. She came into the kitchen while I was photographing the empty insulin slot in the fridge. For half a second, our eyes met. My heart slammed against my ribs. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Inventory," I said. "Doctor wants me organized." She stared at me. Then she laughed softly. "Good," she said. "I like when you listen to professionals." That laugh again, the one that used to mean nothing. I slept with my shoes on that night. Sunday came. Church, Carol insisted. She wanted witnesses, community, the image of a worried wife. I smiled, shook hands, took compliments on my health, my sugar spike just sitting in the pew. Afterward, in the parking lot, she squeezed my arm a little too hard and whispered, "Smile. People notice things." That's when I knew the sink wasn't the end. It was rehearsal. And the next move would decide whether I lived quietly or finally drew a line she couldn't step over. I didn't wake up one morning with a clean plan and a clear conscience. What I had instead was a knot in my stomach and a calendar with dates circled in pencil. When you're over 50, you don't rush revenge. You check your blood pressure first. I started by doing the one thing I'd avoided for months. I asked for help. Quietly, legally, without telling Carol a thing. The legal aid clinic in Joliet was tucked behind a strip mall with a nail salon and a tax prep office. I sat on a hard plastic chair, clutching a manila folder like it was a flotation device. The attorney assigned to me, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes, didn't flinch when I told her about the insulin. She asked questions, dates, times. Did I have medical records, witnesses, proof of the transfers? I slid the folder across the desk. She nodded slowly. "You did the right thing by documenting," she said, "and the right thing by not confronting her again." That last part stung, because every bone in my body wanted to look Carol in the eye and ask her how she could do that to me. But wanting and surviving aren't the same thing. My endocrinologist was next. He adjusted my regimen, yes, but more importantly, he put my situation in writing. Stress-induced hyperglycemia, risk of rapid DKA if insulin access was interrupted. His words were careful and plain. They didn't accuse. They described consequences. Stress, he said, tapping the paper, can kill you slower than insulin deprivation. But together, that's dangerous. I took the long way home that day and pulled off at a rest stop on I-55. My hands were shaking again, blood sugar creeping past 300. I sat on a concrete bench and watched cars blur past, breathing through it. I thought about how ridiculous it was that after decades of managing a disease, the biggest threat wasn't my body, it was my marriage. The plan, when it finally took shape, wasn't elegant, it was slow, ugly, built around waiting and resisting the urge to react. I changed my passwords, all of them. I enabled alerts on every account, not to trap Carol, but to know when she moved. I synced everything to cloud backups she couldn't access. I stopped arguing. I stopped explaining. I became boring. That scared her more than yelling ever had. The first close call came on a Wednesday night. I walked into the kitchen to find Carol standing in front of the fridge door, open, rummaging. "What are you looking for?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. She didn't turn around. Dinner ideas. She shifted a carton of milk. For one frozen second, I thought she'd find the insulin pen taped behind the crisper drawer. My heart thudded so hard it made me lightheaded. Then she closed the door. "Maybe we'll do soup," she said. I went into the bathroom and checked my sugar. 320. I sat on the edge of the tub until my legs stopped shaking. The second close call was worse. She confronted me about my phone one evening, holding it up like evidence. "Why did you change your passcode?" "Security update," I said. "Doctor recommended less stress." She laughed. "Your doctor gives IT advice now." I almost said it. Almost told her I knew about the transfers. Almost told her I had copies of everything. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood. "Going for a drive," I said instead. I drove aimlessly for an hour, my thoughts racing faster than my car. When I got home, she was calm again. Too calm. In the middle of all this, I had to keep myself alive. That meant insulin logistics that felt absurd for a married man. I stored backup pens in my trunk in a locked drawer at Frank's place, in my old work locker at the warehouse. I hated every second of it. It made me feel weak, paranoid. But I also slept with a little less fear. I met my old logistics buddy for lunch at a diner off Route 30. We talked shop like we always had processes, audits, mistakes that only show up when someone rushes. He never once told me to get even. He told me to let time and records do their work. People who think they're in control, he said, stirring his coffee, get sloppy. Sunday came again. Carol insisted on church. She wanted the image. I gave it to her. I shook hands, I smiled. I listened to the sermon about honesty and felt my sugar spike from irony alone. In the parking lot, she squeezed my arm and whispered, "You're doing better." I knew what she meant. That night I sat at the kitchen table long after she went to bed. I lined up my notes, my medical letters, the transaction logs, the dates, everything clean, everything factual. My hands were steady for once. The plan wasn't about destroying Carol. It was about stopping the countdown. And the next step would make it public. The courtroom didn't smell like justice. It smelled like old wood floor cleaner and nervous sweat. The benches creaked when people shifted their weight. Somewhere behind me, someone coughed and wouldn't stop. I sat at the small table to the left, hands folded back straight, trying to keep my breathing slow. I wore the same gray jacket I used for funerals and weddings. Carol sat across the aisle with her attorney, a box of tissues already open in front of her, like a prop. She looked smaller there, paler, not fragile, calculated, the kind of woman who knew exactly when to dab her eyes. People from church were in the gallery. I recognized them without turning around. Neighbors, a couple we'd had dinner with just months before. I felt my glucose creeping up, that familiar pressure behind the eyes. Stress does that. I focused on the sound of my own breathing instead. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Judge Miller was in her early 60s, hair pulled back, tight, glasses low on her nose. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The prosecutor began with facts, dates, locations, my name, Carol's name, Plainfield, Illinois, Thanksgiving weekend, type 1 diabetes, insulin as a prescribed life-sustaining medication. No adjectives, no drama. Then she introduced the evidence. Medical records from the ER, a statement from my endocrinologist explaining what happens when insulin is withheld, how quickly diabetic ketoacidosis can develop. Minutes felt like hours as she read it aloud. I stared at the table, jaw clenched. Next came the financial records, screens projected onto a monitor, transfers highlighted in yellow, $500, $900, each time stamped late at night, each tied to the same device. Carol's attorney objected once. The judge overruled him without looking up. Then came the video. Carol stiffened. The audio filled the room before the image did. The sound of running water, the faint chirp of my glucose monitor. My own voice strained, saying, "Please." Carol's voice followed, calm, almost amused. "You're sweating already. What's that 400? A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The video showed her hand holding the insulin vial over the sink, tilting, pausing, then the splash. I didn't look at the screen. I didn't have to. I remembered every second. When the video ended, the room was silent, the kind of silence that presses on your ears. Judge Miller leaned forward. She didn't look at the lawyers. She looked directly at Carol. This, she said, her voice low and even, was not a marital disagreement. Carol started to shake her head. "You didn't withhold affection," the judge continued. "You didn't argue over money. You weaponized life-saving medication." Carol broke then. Not a quiet tear, a full collapse. Shoulders shaking, hands over her face. The tissues finally put to use. Behind me, someone whispered, "My God." Judge Miller waited. She let the sound play out. Then she spoke again. "I've seen bitter divorces in this courtroom," she said. "But this wasn't about assets. You weren't holding a password." She paused. "You were holding a stopwatch." The gavel came down once. Charges were read: reckless endangerment, financial exploitation, evidence tampering. Carol sobbed harder. Her attorney put a hand on her arm. She didn't look at me, not once. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, not triumph. Air. When the hearing ended, people stood in small knots, whispering. A man from church shook his head slowly. Someone avoided my eyes. Someone else met them and nodded. Outside, the cold air hit my face. It smelled clean, real. Frank stood by the steps, hands in his pockets. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. A glucose alert, elevated but steady, manageable. For the first time in weeks, the countdown wasn't ticking in my ears. It was over. Or so I thought. I moved out 2 days after the hearing. Not in a dramatic way. No slam doors, no speeches. I packed what I needed into the back of my old Ford and drove 20 minutes east to a one-bedroom apartment near Naperville that smelled like fresh paint and someone else's cooking. The silence hit me first. No footsteps, no sighs, no running water unless I turned it on myself. That mattered more than I expected. The first night I lined up my insulin on the kitchen counter and counted it twice. Pens, backup vials, test strips, glucagon kit. I locked them in a small metal box I'd bought at Menards on the way over. Combination only I knew. I stood there longer than necessary, listening to the click of the lock, letting it register in my body. Safe. Sleep didn't come easy. My mind replayed the sink, the laugh, the splash. Trauma doesn't ask permission. It just shows up. I woke twice to check my glucose, even though the numbers were fine. Old habits mixed with new scars. In the morning, sunlight came through the blinds and landed on the bare floor. I made coffee. I ate toast. I took insulin without anyone watching. The ordinary felt like a privilege. Carol's attorney tried once to reach out, a message about misunderstandings and stressful circumstances. I didn't respond. My lawyer handled it. That boundary felt like muscle I hadn't used in years, sore but strengthening. I told a few people the truth. Frank, of course, my sister in Peoria. One guy from church who pulled me aside and said quietly, "I'm glad you're still here." That was enough. I joined a diabetes support group that met every other Tuesday in the back room of a community center. Folding chairs, bad coffee, good people. We talked about insulin prices, CGM alarms, and the little tricks you learn to stay upright in a body that needs constant negotiation. I didn't tell my whole story. Not yet. I didn't have to. What surprised me most was the absence of anger. I'd expected to feel it roar back once the dust settled. Instead, there was something steadier underneath. Clarity. A calm I hadn't known I was missing. Revenge for me wasn't watching Carol cry. It wasn't the judge's words, sharp as they were. It was waking up and knowing my survival no longer depended on someone else's mood. I took walks in the evening, just around the block. Lawns trimmed too short, porch lights coming on at dusk. Normal life continuing indifferent and beautiful. My glucose numbers evened out as the weeks passed. Stress has a flavor, and it finally faded. I learned something I wish I'd learned sooner. Dignity isn't about toughness. It's about drawing a line where survival begins and refusing to step back over it for anyone. If you're listening to this and something in it feels uncomfortably familiar, please hear me. Control dressed up as love is still control, and your health, your life is not a bargaining chip. If this story gave you pause, share it with someone you trust. And if you stayed with me all the way to the end, thank you. I read every comment. It means more than you think. Take care of yourselves. Really take care.